everybody and welcome to the channel. Bob Sales this time's next year. Pink Panther's going to be sneaking into the veve app for its 60th anniversary. But before we get into the drop, let's get into the story. Let's dig into the creation, the music and the history. Pink Panther is a devilish, fun-loving prankster created in 1963. And the show is still running to this day. I think everyone has different ideas of what the Panther actually represents. The creators said it is like a James Bond figure. He also said this cartoon was for the intellect of adults. Now if we think back to the Black Panther, we think of him as a diamond thief. In fact, the diamond itself was actually called the Pink Panther. So with this story, there are pretty much four main characters that made this happen. This was of course David DPT, Friz Freelong, and filmmaker Blake Edwards and composer Henry Mancini. And yes, I probably said most of them names wrong. So let's start this with DPT. His father was one of the Warner Bros. Top execs at the time, so there should be no shock that David started his career as a sound and film editor for Warner Bros. He did several productions with them, and one of them even being titled Them. He later left to do some work on the movie Around the World in 80 Days. However, after a short stint, he did actually return to Warner Bros. To run the commercial side of the business. In the 1960s, he took control of the cartoon division and all the artists and animators alike. Of course, one of them being Mr. Freeling. Isidore Freeling, also known as Friz, early on in his career did in fact work for the United Film Ad Service. There he made some very important friends, no other than Hugh Herman and Uber Iwerks. In 1923, Iwerks' friend Walt Disney moved to Hollywood and put a call for his friends to join him. Now we all know from the Disney side, this is a key moment in their history. Iwerks did in fact join. Unlike Iwerks, Friz didn't actually go to work for Walt until 5 years later. Over the years he did lots of different work. This included Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. In an interview, Friz actually said Walt reached out to him multiple times over the years and always showed kindness and patience. He said Walt wanted to make it work and he was willing to wait. However, after joining Disney, Walt did not show that attitude at all. Instead, he actually became abusive and harassed me daily. A year later, I actually left the company. Now, another reason he did leave Disney was because he was stripped of his bonuses for so-called animation mistakes. That was in fact the last straw. He picked up and left and went back to his old job in Kansas. It was later on he would team up with Herman to start their own studio. So the nickname Fritz was actually started by Hugh Herman himself. This was why the pair was working for Warner Brothers. He initially started calling him Congressman Frisbee after a fictional senator. Fritz went on to work for Warner Brothers for 30 years. He did in fact create a lot of the Looney Tunes we all know today. This includes Porky Pigs, Bugs Bunny, Tweety Bird and Sylvester. Even Speedy Gonzales.
Come on out! Hello, pussycat.
And that's just some of the Looney Tunes. He's actually credited with creating 300 Warner Brother works. But without warning, Warner Animation shuts down in 1963 to go into more generic television. Warner did offer Fritz a role, but he actually declined it. This brings us to filmmaker Blake Edwards. David and Fritz had just opened their company, their new studio, when Blake walked in. He wanted to hire them to create a Pink Panther character for a comedy short starring Peter Sellers. This would be the first time the actor was playing Inspector Jax Clouseau. He was so successful at this role, they actually carried it on through the Pink Panther animated series. But the character was just named as simply the Inspector. The film The Pink Panther debuted in 1963 in Italy, but a year later was released in the US. This was the first installment of the franchise. In 1964, the Pink Panther would make his appearance for the group's first cartoon short. This was called Pink Think. In the short, a painter was continuously stopped from painting his house blue. The culprit, the antagonist, no other than the Pink Panther with his pink pot of paint. This short did in fact go on to win an Oscar, the only Oscar a Pink Panther animated short would ever pick up. After the partnership ended in the 1980s between DPT and Friz, DPT actually went on to work for Marvel Productions as its founding president. He actually worked really closely with Stan Lee. Now there is definitely a fourth man we should mention, Henry Mancini. He of course made the original iconic score for the intro. This was arguably just as popular as the show, or maybe even more so. The music itself was actually nominated for an award, but it was actually beaten by Mary Poppins. Although he lost this award, he did go on to win 4 Academy Awards, a Golden Globe and 20 Grammys, an Oscar and even a Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. Also, unlike today's cartoons, the animation was actually made to the time of the music rather than the other way round. Pink Panther has loads of mass merchandising and stands for multiple charities around the world, one of them including cancer awareness. Unfortunately, because the IP is so old, the creation is so old, everyone included in the making has sadly passed away. Henry Henry did in fact die to cancer himself. But veve have actually released an early article like I asked for, so thank you for that. So we can actually get into the details. 3 Pink Panther collectibles drop Sunday the 10th of September, 8 AM PT, which of course is 4 PM UK time. This price for these collectibles is going to be 30 gems and all are first appearances. First edition for public sale is going to be 41 and a total of 90 editions will be withheld by veve and the licensors. The rare variation is the only one with animation and sound, and it is the original score. And I believe that's the first in veve's history, it's the actual original score. This one's going to be mint in a whopping 3,600 editions. The ultra rare version is the pink chrome one, and this one looks really nice. This will be mint in 1,600 editions. And of course, last but not least, the secret rare, the Pink Panther gold version. And this one's mint in only 600 editions, and this one looks really nice also. Now, my only concern with this veve drop wise is the age of the IP. Everyone included in this video has sadly passed. This does get me to my next point. This could be a very valuable insight into your collecting journey in physical life and digital. In the toy world, we have what you'd call a 40 to 50 year revolving collector's market. So let me explain. So you get a toy, you play with it in your childhood, and that'll be the end of you probably lose it, break it, etc. And 15 to 20 years later, you start thinking of the nostalgia. Maybe you bump into something that reminds you of your childhood. Also can happen when you wanted something for Christmas, say, and you never got it. Now you're grown up with cash and you now have the means to purchase the item you always wanted. So I would say it's usually around the age of 25 to 30 that you may go back and start collecting the past. Now remember, at this time there's others like you doing the same thing, and this is when the prices start to increase, making them valuable. Now by the time you're in your 40s, this is most likely when your items have most likely peaked. This is because everyone for the last 10 years has been looking and buying up the same item. Now by your 50s, you will most likely see a price decline. Obviously this does depend on the toy itself. Obviously if it's a kind of Star Wars toy, it's always going to be valuable. I would say around 50s, this is when people usually start selling off some of their items and putting it to the future. Also the user base, as sad as it is becoming less at this point. People don't last forever. Take tin toys for example. They've always been well sought after and some still are. It's definitely less now than ever. They was first produced as early as the 1850s. The people that once had them in their childhood memories felt the nostalgia are now gone. And because of this, the prices have now dipped, the interest has now dipped.
Oh! Oh! It went to zero!
It's mainly just a hardcore collector's market. I would basically describe this IP in that sort of sense, but the Pink Panther is still running today, so that helps it a lot. I must say the collectibles have been done really nice, and overall they look very different to each other, which makes them more collectible. Cost is also not bad, so that does make the drop look a bit more attractive. I do think the gold version is going to do really well. I'm not sure about the dual one, but I do think that's pretty unique as it's the first time we're seeing that surface. But overall, I think it's a good drop to go for the way it's been done, but the IP is getting a bit old, bit past its user base. But as always, I've been your host, Bob Sales. This time next year, we will be millionaires. A peace.
I love gold. The look of it, the taste of it, the smell of it, the texture.